Hello. What does it take to create a good garden? I'm Liz Zorab and this is Byther Farm. Last month I went to visit Becky from So Much More to see how she's getting on in her garden. Becky moved house just a tiny bit before we did, so we're at similar stages of setting up our new gardens.
Hello, my name's Becky from So Much More and this is my garden. Now, I used to have a really nice big garden in Hampshire and it was super photogenic. It was really old, it had loads of big old fruit trees in it, lovely old wooden greenhouse. It was all just very, very easy to garden with because it was, it drew you outside. It really wanted you to go out there and be part of it. There was birds chirping in the trees, there was a lovely pond. And I've recently moved to a new build property here in Devon, and this is actually a rental property. So when I first moved here it was just a bare patch of grass. It was pretty scrubby looking, it wasn't even nice grass, and I just used the no-dig method to create myself some beds. It took about a day, and I bought some wood just to mark where the beds were and made it into a vegetable garden. It's perhaps not the most Instagrammable vegetable garden, but it does the job. And often when you see these gardens on the internet, you see them on social media and stuff, and they just look so perfect. But in reality, that's not really true. Even my old garden, which was absolutely beautiful, I'd have to work the angles to make sure that it looked like it did, which was much easier when you have the privilege of having this fantastic garden in the first place. It's a lot more difficult in a garden like this. When I first moved here, I had nothing, so I had to start literally from the ground up, and I got myself a little plastic flappy greenhouse. It worked really well. It was £40, and I had to screw it down to the floor because otherwise it would take off every time there was a little bit of wind. But I set up my entire garden from that tiny little greenhouse and it did work really well. So the most important thing for me was to try and set up the garden as an ecosystem. So it's really difficult when you're starting with a bare patch of land. The most important thing obviously is to get some plants in, because you need to have plants to feed the animals, to feed the insects, to feed the birds, and also to feed the life in the soil. So once I'd set up my beds, I put some plants in. I really enjoyed growing some perennial plants. I've got some perennial 9-star broccoli over there. I've got some lovely hops as well, which I really enjoy growing too. And just having roots in the ground to get the soil built up, and also to just start to establish an ecosystem basically out of nothing. And what I've got now is that we're going into the second year of the garden. I've got lots of things that I planted last year that are now going into flower, and I've got this constant buzz of bumblebees and hoverflies and all these things that are coming into the garden that are hopefully going to be a positive influence on my growing this year. I came into gardening after studying a degree in ecology and botany. I learned about how plants work, how ecosystems work, how the soil works, and then from there kind of set up my own style of gardening. And for me, having studied that, I have a real interest in the way that plants interact with their environment, and in particular soil. So soil is the most important thing in my garden. It's not just an inert substrate that you put your plants into. Soil is a living ecosystem. It's fantastically diverse, and a lot of the things that live in the soil are in there to help your plants. Now that might sound a little bit odd, but actually the things that live in the soil rely on the health of your plants in order to feed them. So it's in the interest of the microscopic life in the soil that we can't see to maintain the lives of the plants. So if you've got healthy soil, you're going to have healthy plants because they want to look after one another. So the way that we look after our soil is to do it in as natural a way as possible. We have to understand that when we are growing vegetables and things, we're taking away organic matter on a more or less constant basis. Every time we harvest something or clear an old plant, we are removing organic matter that in nature would just be returned to the surface of the soil. So instead of doing that, we put it on our compost heap, we wait a year until it's like nice compost, and then add it to the surface. Now, no natural systems have somebody coming in and digging the organic matter in, because that's not the way that the soil works. The things in the soil come up to feed from the surface. So we lay our compost on top, and then the other really important thing for maintaining healthy soil is to try and have as many plants in the ground as possible. Now, we're in April at the moment and there aren't that many plants in my garden, but it's going to be getting more and more full as the season progresses, and I'm going to try and keep those roots in the ground for as long as I possibly can. As long as you are looking after the health of your garden, you're trying your best to create it as an ecosystem, to let the grass grow a little bit so that you've got some more life in there, and you're letting things go to flower and go to seed. You're going to be building up life in your garden, and that is really the best you can hope for. Gardens don't need to be really, really beautiful and picturesque in order to be very functional. Now, last month I got myself this, and this was, it's a bit of a game changer really, but it was £50 off Facebook Marketplace, and I took the glass out of it and we picked the entire frame up, 4 of us, 1 on each corner, and walked it down the street and kind of chucked it over the wall of the garden, and here we are, and it's a total game changer. But what I have here is a really, really good growing space which only cost me £50, and what I had last year was a pretty good growing space which only cost me £40. The thing is that you can have all the really, really good kit, but the plants don't know that. They don't care whether you have a brand new greenhouse that costs thousands of pounds or whether you have a £50 thing that you kind of just lifted up from a neighbour's garden and dropped into your garden. They don't care. So you can start as big or as small as you like when it comes to investments. And I started really small. I'm building it up as I go along, and I really love where I've got to now, just 1 year in, with very, very minimal investment. Gardens can be functional regardless of whether they are a rented property, whether you're growing in containers, whether you're just growing on your windowsill. The most important thing is to focus on growing the food and not on how it looks. By all means, have plenty of flowers because they are great for the pollinators, but it's all about whether or not the garden works.
And so, bearing in mind all that really good advice, I have been filling my beds with lots and lots of plants, not just the ones you can see, but lots of seeds as well. I've allowed the grass to grow longer, and I've been trying to build up that soil health as I create the garden.
Biodiversity. There are more lives in one handful of healthy garden soil than humans who've ever lived on the planet. Soil is a major contributor to global biodiversity. Soil biodiversity is largely overlooked because it's microscopic. Did you know that almost all of the microorganisms used to produce antibiotics come from the soil?
To see some more of Becky's garden, head over to her channel. I'll leave a link on the screen and in the video description.